I have been tracking the Persian Gulf security corridor for over a decade. Missile exchanges, proxy skirmishes, tanker seizures, sanctions cycles that repeat themselves like bad sequels. I have watched this region absorb shock after shock and recalibrate. But this morning, May 17th, 2026, something happened that I have never seen in this conflict. Not in terms of destruction. The physical damage was minimal. In terms of what was chosen as a target, that choice is the entire story, and almost no one is reading it correctly. A drone, one single drone, crossed the western border of the United Arab Emirates this morning. 2 others were shot down. This one was not. It struck a generator on the outer edge of the Baraka nuclear energy plant, the first nuclear power facility ever constructed in the Arab world. A plant supplying roughly a quarter of the UAE's national electricity grid. No radiation leak. No reactor damage. By every technical checklist, a non-event. But here is what I need you to hold in your mind before we go any further. The attacker did not need to cause a catastrophe today. That was never the point. What they needed, what they achieved, was contact. Documented. Confirmed by the IAEA within hours. And the question that should be keeping every Gulf security analyst awake tonight is not what was struck. It is why this target, why this week, and why exactly 6 days after a Wall Street Journal report quietly rewrote the entire map of who is actually fighting this war. That is what this video is going to unpack. I spent this morning pulling primary sources, the IAEA Director General's statement, the UAE Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulations release, CENTCOM's operational disclosures, and the original WSJ intelligence report from May 11th. If you want the strategic read, not the scroll past headline, the actual architecture of what is happening here, subscribe to Nexa World Brief now and turn on notifications. This story is not finished. Now, let us build the picture from the ground up. To understand what happened at Baraka today, you need to understand what the UAE has been living through since February 28, 2026, the date U.S. and Israeli forces launched coordinated strikes on Iranian military infrastructure, and this conflict formally opened. From that moment, the UAE became the most heavily targeted nation in the region. Not Israel, not a forward American base, the UAE. According to figures confirmed by Emirati defense authorities in early May, UAE air defense systems intercepted more than 2,800 missiles, drones, and cruise missiles between late February and early May. Read that number again, 2,800. This is not a nation on the periphery of a conflict. This is a civilian economy absorbing an industrial-scale pressure campaign while simultaneously keeping its ports open, its financial markets functioning, and its airspace commercially active. On April 8, 2026, the United States announced a conditional ceasefire. The barrage paused. Diplomatic channels cracked open. Then earlier this month, strikes resumed. And this morning, 3 drones crossed into UAE airspace from the western desert border. 2 were intercepted by Patriot and THAAD batteries. The third reached the outer perimeter of the Baraka complex in the Al Dhafra region of Abu Dhabi. The Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulation, the UAE's independent nuclear watchdog, confirmed immediately that plant safety was not compromised. All 4 reactor units continued operating. Emergency diesel generators assumed power supply for Unit 3. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi issued a formal statement within hours. He confirmed radiation levels remained at normal background readings. He also confirmed the agency was in direct contact with Emirati authorities and prepared to deploy technical assistance. Then Grossi said something that matters beyond the bureaucratic language. He expressed, and I am characterizing his phrasing accurately, grave concern. He stated explicitly that military activity threatening nuclear safety is unacceptable under any circumstances. That is the United Nations' top nuclear authority placing this event on a very short list of precedents. The UAE's own foreign ministry called it a terrorist attack and a dangerous escalation. No country has been officially named. No group has claimed responsibility. The investigation is formally open. Those are the verified facts we can stand on. Now here's what the standard analysis is missing. 6 days before the drone reached Baraka, on May 11, 2026, the Wall Street Journal published a report citing people familiar with the matter, subsequently confirmed in broad outline by Reuters and multiple regional intelligence desks. The report revealed that the United Arab Emirates had secretly conducted offensive military strikes inside Iran. The specific operation named an airstrike on an oil refinery on Lavan Island in the Persian Gulf carried out in early April 2026, around the same window that President Trump was publicly announcing the conditional ceasefire. The strike caused a large fire and knocked significant refinery capacity offline for months. Iran at the time said its facility had been hit by an enemy attack, and without naming the perpetrator, it responded with retaliatory missile and drone strikes against the UAE and Kuwait. According to the WSJ reporting and corroborating outlets, the aircraft used were Western-manufactured fighter jets and drones. The UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs declined to comment, but pointed to prior statements affirming its right to respond militarily to hostile acts. The Pentagon also declined to comment. This is not a minor footnote. This is the thread that reframes everything. The UAE was not merely a nation absorbing Iranian strikes while calling for diplomacy. According to this reporting, it was simultaneously operating as an active offensive combatant, the only Gulf state to have done so alongside the United States and Israel. That changes the strategic logic of today's attack completely. This is not Iran striking a neutral party. This is a response, calculated, delayed, and aimed precisely at the asset that the UAE has marketed to the world as its crown jewel of peaceful nuclear development. The drone did not fly to Baraka by accident. It flew there because of Lavan Island. And that is the piece of architecture the standard coverage is not building for you. Now, add the third layer. U.S. Central Command publicly confirmed an increase in combat air patrol sorties over the Strait of Hormuz. Operation Project Freedom, the U.S. military operation protecting freedom of navigation in the strait, currently involves more than 100 aircraft and 15,000 personnel. Energy Secretary Chris Wright stated publicly that if no path to a negotiated settlement emerged within days, the military option to physically reopen the strait remained actively on the table. 3 layers. A nuclear plant struck during a fragile ceasefire. A covert war exposed 6 days prior. A superpower military machine running at elevated operational tempo in the same corridor. Ask yourself now, is the timing of this strike a coincidence? Or is it a response that the public only learned to read last week? From a purely military standpoint, striking an electrical generator on the outer perimeter of a nuclear facility accomplishes almost nothing operationally. It does not degrade combat capability. It does not disrupt fuel logistics. It does not neutralize air defense infrastructure. By conventional military accounting, it is close to meaningless, which is precisely why it is so strategically loud. What occurred at Baraka fits a pattern that security scholars call threshold signaling, the deliberate act of making contact with a boundary without crossing it. The objective is not destruction. The objective is communication. The message has 3 layers, each one sent to a different audience simultaneously. To the UAE, we can reach this facility. We chose restraint today. To the IAEA and the international community, this conflict now has a nuclear dimension. Your engagement is no longer optional. To energy markets and the governments that depend on them, the cost of this remaining unresolved is rising. For a relatively contained operational expenditure, the attacker generated maximum diplomatic and psychological pressure. That is not improvisation. That is a doctrine. Now, not every analyst accepts the controlled signaling interpretation, and that counter-argument deserves honest space. A significant body of independent security scholarship pushes back hard on framing attacks on nuclear infrastructure as calibrated communication. The IAEA did not activate emergency diesel generators at Unit 3 because nothing happened. That is a real operational event at a real nuclear power facility. International law, specifically the IAEA safety frameworks and the principles embedded in the Geneva Conventions, does not carve out exceptions for threshold signaling. An attack on nuclear infrastructure is an attack on nuclear infrastructure, regardless of stated intent or the physical distance from the reactor core. And the history of controlled escalation in this region contains specific examples of signals that were catastrophically misread. The assumption that both parties share the same understanding of where the red line actually sits is exactly that, an assumption, not a verified strategic fact. In a conflict involving multiple state actors, proxy forces, covert operations, and a ceasefire framework already under visible strain, the margin for misreading is wide. The IAEA's language today was not bureaucratic formality. Both things can be true at once. The strike may have been tactically deliberate, and it may still represent a genuinely dangerous precedent. Now step back from the military picture and look at the financial architecture. The UAE has intercepted more than 2,800 missiles, drones, and cruise missiles since late February. Each Patriot or THAAD interception represents an expenditure of several $1 million per round. Each Shahed series drone, the primary instrument of Iran's aerial pressure campaign, costs, according to open-source defense analysis, a fraction of that per unit. The arithmetic is not incidental. It is structural. When one side deploys low-cost attrition assets against high-cost defense systems at industrial scale, the strategic objective is not battlefield victory in the conventional sense. It is economic exhaustion. Force the defending side to spend itself into a position where either its stockpiles or its political will, or both, begin to degrade. Run the numbers on 2,800 interceptions. The financial burden of maintaining that defensive tempo for months creates pressure that operates entirely outside any single dramatic military event. It is slow. It is largely invisible to mainstream news coverage. And according to analysts who track defense procurement cycles, it is one of the most effective tools available to a conventionally inferior military force. Now apply that to Baraka. If today's strike was designed not only to send a diplomatic signal, but to force the UAE to invest in an entirely new tier of nuclear facility protection, hardened perimeter systems, dedicated electronic warfare coverage, additional air defense batteries specifically configured for low-altitude drone threats, then the cost calculation shifts again. The attacker spent relatively little. The defender now faces a potential obligation to spend enormously. That is not a military tactic. That is economic strategy conducted through military means. And the question that should be keeping strategic planners awake tonight is not whether Baraka was damaged. It was not in any operationally significant sense. The real question is, how many more of these low-cost, high-signal strikes can the defending coalition absorb before the economic weight of defense begins reshaping the political calculations at the negotiating table? That question does not have a clean answer yet. But the data from 11 weeks suggests the pressure is accumulating faster than most public analysis acknowledges. Let me bring this out of the war room and into your daily life, because this is where geopolitics either earns its relevance or collapses into academic noise. The Strait of Hormuz is approximately 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point. Through that corridor, roughly 20% of the world's total oil supply moves every single day. Not 20% of regional production. Global supply. Saudi crude heading to Asian refineries. UAE condensate bound for European petrochemical plants. Liquefied natural gas shipments destined for markets from Japan to Germany. When that corridor experiences even perceived disruption, energy markets do not wait for confirmation. They price in uncertainty immediately. We observed this pattern in 2019 when drone strikes hit Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq facility. A single, rapidly contained event sent oil prices approximately 15% higher within hours of markets opening. The physical damage was repaired within weeks. The price signal persisted considerably longer. Today's event at Baraka did not damage oil infrastructure, but it did something energy traders understand instinctively. It raised the perceived risk premium on every cargo moving through Hormuz. Insurance underwriters price that risk into shipping contracts. Shipping companies pass the cost to importers. Importers pass it to distributors. Distributors pass it to retailers. And at the end of that chain, it appears on your receipt. That transmission mechanism does not require a pipeline explosion or a tanker sinking. It requires only sustained uncertainty. And sustained uncertainty is precisely what this conflict has been generating since February 28th. Dubai is not merely a financial center or a tourism destination. It is one of the highest volume cargo transit hubs on the planet. A substantial portion of goods moving between Asian manufacturing centers and European consumer markets passes through UAE logistics infrastructure, Jebel Ali Port, Dubai International Airport cargo terminals, the interconnected free zone network. When security risk assessments for that corridor are elevated, as they have been for 11 weeks, shipping companies reroute. Transit times extend. Freight rates rise to absorb higher insurance premiums. Those costs are not absorbed by corporations as a charity gesture. They move through supply chains with mechanical precision and arrive weeks or months later as price increases on electronics, clothing, pharmaceutical inputs, and agricultural commodities. This is not speculation. This is the documented behavior of global supply chains under geopolitical stress, observed consistently across every major Middle Eastern disruption since the 1973 oil embargo. Central banks in every major economy are currently navigating an environment where inflation remains elevated relative to pre-pandemic baselines and where energy price volatility directly complicates monetary policy decisions. When oil prices spike, inflation expectations rise. When inflation expectations rise, central banks face pressure to hold or raise interest rates. When interest rates hold high, mortgage costs remain elevated, business borrowing becomes more expensive, and consumer purchasing power contracts. That chain of consequence begins at a 21-mile-wide waterway. It ends in your monthly mortgage statement, your car loan rate, and the price of your weekly grocery run. The decision made by whoever launched that drone this morning, a decision made thousands of miles away in a conflict most people cannot locate on a map, has a measurable, traceable connection to the financial conditions you are navigating right now. You are not a spectator to this conflict. You are downstream from it. The pattern at Baraka is not new. History offers a precise mirror, and the reflection should make us pay very close attention. In the lead-up to the 1990 Gulf War, Kuwait was publicly framing itself as a neutral party in regional disputes while simultaneously, according to documented oil ministry records, overproducing OPEC quotas in a way that directly undercut Iraqi economic recovery. The provocation was economic. The response was military. The covert dimension of the aggression only became fully visible after the escalation it triggered. The parallel, the UAE's covert strikes on Lavan Island, offensive military action conducted while publicly maintaining the posture of a nation under attack, fit the identical structural template. The September 2019 strike on Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq oil processing facility, executed during a period of officially cooled U.S.-Iran tensions, caused no mass casualties and was repaired within weeks. Its purpose was entirely psychological and economic. It demonstrated reach, precision, and willingness to strike the most symbolically significant infrastructure in the Gulf. The parallel, Baraka is the Abqaiq of the nuclear domain, not struck for operational effect, struck for maximum symbolic register. In 2019, the UN Secretary-General convened an emergency session within 48 hours of Abqaiq. OPEC held an extraordinary meeting. The G7 issued a joint statement. None of this stopped the underlying conflict dynamic, but each institutional response amplified the signal's reach, effectively broadcasting the attacker's message to every government and every energy market on Earth at no additional cost to the attacker. Today, the IAEA Director General issued a formal statement within hours. The UAE Foreign Minister contacted Grossi directly by phone. The UN's nuclear authority is now formally engaged. The institutional amplification is not a side effect. It is a feature of the strategy. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq tanker war, both sides engaged in what their military planners characterized as calibrated escalation against shipping infrastructure. Each side believed the other shared its understanding of where the escalatory ceiling sat. In 1987, an Iraqi Exocet missile struck the USS Stark, killing 37 American sailors. Iraq called it an accident. The United States accepted that explanation. But the near miss on a full-scale superpower confrontation was far closer than either party's public posture acknowledged. The parallel to 2026, a conflict involving the IRGC's Shadow Committee of Proxy Commanders, UAE Special Operations Units, U.S. carrier strike groups, and Iranian ballistic missile forces, all operating on degraded intelligence and a ceasefire framework already under strain, contains the same structural misread risk. Not certain, not inevitable, but structurally present in a way that should not be minimized. History does not repeat. But the underlying mechanics of asymmetric escalation have a grammar. And today that grammar is speaking in complete sentences. Where does this go from here? 3 structured possibilities, not predictions, trajectories grounded in observable data. The first, the pattern of the past 11 weeks continues. Both sides exchange high-signal, limited-damage strikes. Diplomatic channels, the Omani back-channel track, the IAEA framework, the U.S.-brokered ceasefire architecture remain technically functional. Neither side makes a move that eliminates the other's exit ramp. This is the scenario most consistent with what the behavioral data actually shows. Every major escalation since February has stopped short of a threshold that would foreclose negotiation entirely. The Baraka strike, outer perimeter, no radiation, no casualties, fits that pattern precisely. But managed tension is only stable as long as both sides are reading the same signals the same way. The moment that shared understanding breaks down, that first scenario slides, without warning, into the third. The second, the financial cost of this conflict is not static. It compounds. Iran's Lavan Island refinery, one of its 4 largest oil export hubs, has been offline for weeks. The U.S. naval presence continues to restrict Iranian port access. UAE defense expenditure at the scale of 2,800 interceptions represents a fiscal burden that accumulates regardless of military outcome. Analysts who track sanctions economics and conflict resolution cycles argue that sustained economic attrition, more than any single military event, has historically been the forcing function for negotiated settlements in asymmetric conflicts. If that logic applies here, the pressure on both sides may already be closer to a breaking point than current diplomatic posturing suggests. The third is the scenario that serious risk analysts treat with the most gravity, not because it is the most probable, but because its consequences are categorically different from the others. Every controlled escalation doctrine depends on one assumption: that both parties share an accurate understanding of the other's red lines. In a conflict involving multiple state actors, IRGC proxy networks, covert UAE offensive operations, a ceasefire framework already visibly strained, and now a nuclear facility that has been physically contacted in wartime, the information environment on every side is degraded. One strike misread as existential rather than symbolic. One interception failure at a critical facility. One domestic political pressure point that removes a leader's flexibility to de-escalate. Any of these could move this conflict into territory where off-ramps disappear faster than the diplomatic machinery can respond. The IAEA's language today, grave concern from the world's top nuclear authority, is not bureaucratic formality. It means the institutional architecture designed to prevent worst-case outcomes is now actively engaged. That is not reassurance. That is a warning sign operating at the highest level of international protocol. Baraka still stands. The reactors are running. The investigation is open. No country has been officially named. By the surface metrics, nothing irreversible happened today, but the board has shifted in ways that matter. A nuclear facility has been physically contacted in wartime for the first time in this conflict. The covert architecture of who is actually fighting, and why, is now partially visible to the public. The economic weight of sustained instability in the world's most critical energy corridor continues to accumulate in the background of every financial decision made globally. This is not about what was destroyed today. This is about the message that was sent, and whether the recipient reads it the same way the sender intended. That gap between intended signal and received meaning is where the most consequential events in history have originated. Not in the dramatic moments that make the front page, in the quiet misreadings that no one catches in time. Here is the question I want you to think about and leave in the comments below. And I mean this as a genuine strategic debate, not a poll. If the UAE's covert strikes on Lavan Island were the provocation that triggered the Baraka attack, does that change your assessment of how the international community should respond to what happened this morning? Or does the method of retaliation make the original provocation irrelevant? There is a serious argument on both sides. I want to read what you think. I will be tracking the formal investigation results, the official responses from all parties, and any movement in the Hormuz operational picture as verified information becomes available. This is Nexa World Brief. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The board is not static, and neither is this analysis.